We have a question, Rav. According to what criteria has those who formulated the Chumash choose some rabbis and commentaries over others? Why, as a religious nation, has Israel accepted some prophets opposed to others?
Only because someone appears in the book of the prophets doesn't mean that they were accepted as a prophet over someone else. It says in the Talmud that there were hundreds of thousands of prophets. Only these stories survived. Only because they appear in the books of the prophets doesn't mean they're any more important to us than any other person who claimed to be a prophet at the time. And only because they happen to have a book named after their name doesn't mean that anything written in that book should affect how we do things nowadays. The job of the prophet was to give over God's warnings to a specific people at a specific time. So this is why it's silly to think that a prophet is speaking to us today and at the same time speaking to them back then. It meant something to them, and it's only supposed to be historical for us. We're not supposed to think, only because something appears in a poetic, hyperbolic, symbolic fashion in the prophets, that it must take place nowadays. Nonsense. Every prophecy pretty much has an expiration date and is conditional. That means if Israel doesn't do what they're supposed to be doing, then a good prophecy could turn bad and a bad prophecy could turn good. And this is the example we see is in the book of Jonah. When he went to Nineveh, he told the people that God's going to destroy this place. And he never said, repent. If for some reason the book of Jonah would have ended in the first chapter or the second chapter, someone would be saying, oh, well, you know what? America is Nineveh and God's going to destroy it and God's going to resurrect Nineveh to bring it down. No, but they were kind enough to finish the story and show how the people in Nineveh, which like really could have been a community of converts or of Jews, just like there were Jews all over the world in Alexandria and many places, it showed how they repented and God didn't act his warning out. So it shows that every prophecy is conditional. Now, I know many rabbis teach that in a different manner. They're like, oh no, that only negative prophecies are conditional, but positive prophecies have to take place. That doesn't make any sense. Okay, if God promises something good, that's only if we stay on the right derech. But if we screw it up, then why should your future grandchildren benefit of a prophecy that God gave over to your generation 1,000 years before? It doesn't make any sense. It's all conditional. Regarding on how they choose Meforshim, like commentators of the Torah, it's really all up in the air. Heck, how did Rashi get in there before everyone else? Because for some reason, Rashi is more popular than most commentators. And Rashi's Ashkenazi, right? But so you can't even buy a Sephardi Chumash without Rashi in it. I don't know. In terms of Shulchan Aruch, I know how that became popular because Shulchan Aruch actually first came out right when the printing press came out. So it was the first book of Halakha that was mass produced. Everyone was able to have a copy of Shulchan Aruch in their house, and that's what made it influential. If not, like it would have been in the dustbin of history with other books that were written in the same manner. While in the time of the Rambam, all these things were written by hand. So like every community, if they were lucky, and they were in a lot of Jewish communities, if they were lucky, they had one set of Mishneh Torah. But in terms of commentaries, it may have gone the same way. Now, Rashi existed before the Rambam. Probably when Rashi died, the Rambam was a little kid. Why do they choose Rashi over everyone else? Actually, they teach that the Rambam also had a commentary to the Torah, but it was lost. They also teach that the Rambam had a commentary to the whole Talmud, but it was lost. Now, he does have a commentary to the Mishnah, but not to the whole Talmud. But there's one tractate that survived, or a part of it, which is Tractate Rosh Hashanah of the Rambam. I think in there, like he writes in other places that he had a commentary to other stuff, but it didn't exist anymore. There's books now you can get like Rambam Ala Torah, but that is basically statements in Mishneh Torah that regard a certain pasuk in Torah, and they'll try to rebuild on how he viewed certain pesukim. But in terms of how they choose it, I don't know. For some reason, Rashi takes a cake for everyone, but he's not everyone's cup of tea. Rashi's interpretation of the Chumash is midrashic. His grandson, the Rashbam, actually, in his introduction to his parish to the Chumash, he says that his grandfather Rashi, his goal was to write a Pashat level commentary, but he got off track and he just stuck to Agadah, to Midrash, and that now as Rashi's grandson, that he was going to finish Rashi's work, which is why the Rashbam's interpretation or commentary to the Torah is one of the most literal commentaries to the Torah that we have. There's other ones that are more philosophical, like the Ibn Ezra. The Ramban is very Kabbalistically inclined as well. Although, I mean, the Ramban, because I know we mentioned the notion of being a Makubal and the word Kabbalah. The Ramban was a Kabbalist even before the Zohar was written. He didn't call himself a Kabbalist. I mean, this is afterwards that we started labeling mysticism as Kabbalah. I mean, it was just called mysticism. It was called Merkava. It had different words tied to the whole mystery of Yehezkel and the Holy Chariot.
Clyde wants to know out there in the comments if Rambam actually has a commentary to the Torah.
He did, but it was lost. I mean, so now we don't have it.
Oh, it was lost. Where does that come from that we know that it was lost?
Because it appears elsewhere. I think his son mentions it somewhere. His son Avram ben Avrambam like sort of clarifies and fills in a lot of gaps of what happened in the Rambam's life. Supposedly it was lost. You guys could look up for the source. I'm just quoting what I heard.
Avi Ben Shemesh says, Ma Nishma, when it comes to a rational approach to Torah, what do you think of Mori Yotan Halevi and his videos? I believe that he is Tamini and his Shurim are very straightforward and correct.
All right. He's actually a friend of mine, Jonathan.
Did I say his name wrong? Yes.
Yeah, Rabbi Yonatan Halevi. I'm sorry. Rabbi Yonatan Halevi from San Diego. And I spoke to him on the phone. He says that he'll allow me to interview him one day, but he has too much on his plate in terms of hatred going around. And, you know, if I interview him, he'll have more hatred. But he pretty much teaches what I teach. I mean, he's a little more traditionally Sephardic, and I'm not. But in terms of proselytizing and the way he views the conversion crisis and all this stuff, he says he's on board, and he watches my videos. So I mean, I think he's a good guy. Yeah.
Baruch Hashem, Baruch Hashem. Andrea, you're over there saying you're making gefilte fish. You want to throw in something to end the show with?
I just have a question about. I don't know if this was covered earlier. What does he think about people not fasting because of COVID?
The fasting from the plague.
She was quoting an article that came out that not for the 17th of Tammuz, but for Tisha B'Av, there was a rabbi who said that you were putter from fasting because of COVID. I'm pretty sure everyone acknowledges that you're putter from fasting, which is today, because it's not considered an obligatory fast. Although most people teach it like it's obligatory, it's not obligatory. I mean, it's considered one of the minor fasts. In terms of COVID, I think that if you know the halacha, like you feel that the Jewish people are living through a time of shmad, of difficulty, then fasting is supposed to, as a community, help you get on the right path collectively and do tshuva. For sure. I mean, that's the main reason that like many people used to go to cemeteries and pray. It says that that's a place that arouses tshuva. But in terms of just fasting, because everyone else is fasting, why would COVID, because it weakens your immune system? The reason the rabbis, like we said earlier, the reason they make it a half-day fast is because they know it's not an obligatory fast. So, which means that when it becomes obligatory, that means when Israel is really under persecution, not the country of Israel, but Israel.
So what about Tisha B'Av? Tisha B'Av is 25 hours. Would that really weaken your immune system?
Tisha B'Av is not an optional fast. Now, people like Rabbi David Bar Chaim teach that it's optional. And I think that has to do with him being a Zionist. I mean, he doesn't identify as a Zionist, but he's a supporter of everyone moving back to the land of Israel, which I'm not. So I believe that Tisha B'Av has to be kept. Well, he says it doesn't have to be kept, right? Because we are almost in some form of messianic age because we have sovereignty in our land. There are also Lubavitchers that on Tisha B'Av, they have a Suda, because that's what it says. It says like in Zechariah that God is going to make these days from days of mourning to days of feasting. So people who believe that the Messiah is here, that the Lubavitcher Rebbe is, King Mashiach, don't fast on that day. So Tisha B'Av, because it's understood as a mandatory fast by most people, they do 24 hours. The only fast that people should be fasting nowadays is Yom Kippur, and according to the vast majority of rabbis, Tisha B'Av. And that's really it. And like I said, there are a handful of rabbis who are saying that Tisha B'Av also doesn't apply. But I think it does apply.
Thank you for that. Thank you. That's beautiful. We do have a question that came in here. He says, what is your opinion on capital punishment? And is it anything in the Torah that may give us some help with that?
Well, the Torah is for it. Capital punishment. We have a commandment to burn the evil from amongst our midst. The Torah doesn't say build prisons. And Ir Miklat is not a prison. That's the closest thing we have. A city of refuge is not a prison. Yeah, so the Torah is for it. It's not just for people taking it in their own hands, with the exception of, I guess we just read Parshas Pinchas of what he did. But that was odd. God made an exception for that. The goal is for the court, the collective, the consensus, to put people to death. Why? It's not fair. The victims and the families of the victims, that the murderer should be allowed to live. He who sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. It seems it's pretty clear that the Torah is for capital punishment. Now, forward to today, the state of Israel doesn't have capital punishment, although they allow for it because they've executed one person throughout all of Jewish history, which is Adolf Eichmann. That's the only person Israel has ever executed.
What if we find out the person is innocent? What if we execute, like a lot of times we find out people are innocent?
I think that people have to understand that mistakes could occur, but that doesn't mean that you're going to toss out the whole system just because the possibility of someone being innocent. Capital punishment or killing people when they commit crimes acts as a deterrent for murder. Any other
they do it in Iran. They do capital punishment for child molestation, and they still have tons of child molesters. So it doesn't really act as a deterrent in these Muslim countries. But they do capital punishment for these crimes, and they still have tons of those crimes. I'm telling you, I'm an ex-Muslim. I know about capital punishment in these countries. This is a deterrent.
I disagree that the death penalty is not a deterrent for crime. By the simple fact that after people commit murder, they hire very expensive lawyers in order for them to get life in prison and not the death penalty. Why? Because the dead only know one thing, and that's that it's better to be alive. This whole notion that the death penalty is not a deterrent, I don't see how. You're not killed for eating pork, but you're killed for killing someone else. And I guess you're killed for breaking the Sabbath as well. It shows how important the Sabbath is from God's perspective. That's how we gauge how important a commandment is in the Torah, because God doesn't tell us what commandment is more important. By the punishment attached to that avera, we could know how severe, how important that commandment is in our religion. I guess we'll disagree if you don't believe it's a deterrent.